Thank you, Nicole. Good afternoon. Pleasure to be here. I think yesterday I was introduced as the Senior Director of Water Resources at Salt River Project. Today I'm the Associate General Manager. Tomorrow, who knows? Tomorrow's Friday, too. It could be a good weekend. We'll see. But no, it's a pleasure to be here. Not that. I do manage the Los Angeles Dodgers as well, if you no. Bill knows about that. It's also a pleasure to be a participant as well as a sponsor. SRP is proud to sponsor lots of water conversations throughout the West and particularly here in Arizona, so pleasure to do that. And you heard me talk about SRP yesterday and what we're about. One of the oldest and most successful reclamation projects. We've had a long history, long-standing partnership with the Bureau of Reclamation and the Department of Interior, working on lots of partnerships. It all began with the construction of Roosevelt Dam back in 1911, the completion of Roosevelt Dam in 1911. And I mentioned yesterday that, and I want to make sure Mike hears this as well, next February will be the centennial anniversary of our operating agreement between the Bureau of Reclamation, then the Reclamation Service, and Salt River Project. So probably one of the oldest operating agreements for one of the Bureau's facilities. And that agreement has never changed since day one. So it's been a perfect agreement to operate under, and we've had a successful partnership. So I appreciate working with the Department of Interior and the Bureau as well. So I'll stop talking about that, and we'll talk about Mike. I've known Mike for almost 20 years now. We've worked a lot on Indian water rights settlements over the years, and we've had good successes in those, and so appreciate his leadership as well. He is the second highest ranking official at Interior. He's a former commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation. He's been in the Obama administration since basically day one after he was confirmed. He's telling me that maybe another term as well. We'll see, depending on who gets elected and where he fits in. We'll see. But he's a key leader in implementing all of the Interior Department's programs. Nicole mentioned the Natural Resource Investment Center. I just met Jeff Klein, who's the executive director. We have a lot to talk about going forward, and it's a big part of your program. The Water Smart program has been a huge success as well. I think that's Ann Castle's program, but it's gone a long way. So and you heard about it yesterday as well. So, but Mike's worked on a lot of issues: Indian water rights settlements, resolving issues on drought in the West. He's been a good friend of Arizona's, good friend of the West as well. And so I'll stop talking, and with that, I'll introduce Mike Connor, the Deputy Secretary of Interior.
Thank you, sir.
You bet. Thank you.
I was going to be magnanimous to Dave until he misrepresented my views on a follow-up term. I'm a tired old man, I think, and so it's best to move on at the appropriate time. But thank you very much for that kind introduction. I have known Dave for 20 years, and it's been a very good, productive relationship, personally as well as between the Interior Department and whatever role I've played, as well as SRP. So I thank you. I will be unemployed next February, so if you have an anniversary celebration or something like that, I'll be happy to attend from wherever it is that I am at that point in time. Thank you very much for having me here. I've very much appreciated the dialogue that I've had with Craig Mackey and about Protect the Flows on an ongoing basis, and I very much appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk to the group in the context and the setting that you have. We have a lot of very good partners in the area of water, in the Colorado River Basin in particular, the states, the municipalities, the tribes, farmers, conservation groups, recreationists, all I think have built an increasing amount of collaboration in dealing with the issues that we do. Protect the Flows is unique in that context as the business voice of the Colorado River. And I think this is a necessary and an additional very valuable voice to add to the discussions that we have. And I would just note, I can't help but always do a little commentary about what's going on in Washington, D.C., and a little bit of the dysfunction that I see at times in our nation's capital. I think the business voice, particularly as it's done here in the Colorado River Basin, when partnering with different constituencies, is becoming increasingly important in the area of public policy, providing stability, quite frankly, in representing good policies that add to the stability of a good business environment, but a balanced one that addresses sustainability issues. And from that standpoint, that's what's needed in a time of sometimes crazy rhetoric that exists in Washington, D.C. And a perfect example of this is just, and I don't raise this issue to talk about the substance of the issue, but I think it really is telling with respect to the ability of the business community to really move public policy. Just this week, there's been a lot of discussion about certain bills in state legislatures. Georgia had a religious liberties bill that was getting a lot of attention. Governor Deal was having to decide whether he was going to approve the legislation or veto the legislation, and by all accounts that I saw, with respect to the news media reports, the strong business coalition, a diverse group of businesses who look at doing business in Georgia, did not think that that would be a good message to send from a business standpoint, and from that standpoint, they are credited with the governor's decision to veto that bill. And I just think that's one of those areas that I reference so that you understand that a lot of us who function in these political arenas understand the good input and the quality of the input that comes from the business community. Two ways I think about the business of water, first of all, is one broadly, and I think the one that a lot of us think about water as a fundamental equation to communities' needs, and that's water supports business needs, whether it be recreational activity or whether it be manufacturing activity. It also, and as we know from that standpoint, I always reference this because Craig always gives me an attaboy when I reference this. There was the 2012 ASU study that identified that there's about $1.4 trillion of economic activity on an annual basis that's reliant on the Colorado River and the entire watershed. And of course, of that, there's $25 billion per year that's based on the recreational activities and businesses associated with the reliance on the Colorado River. So it definitely supports the business needs, the stability of the overall economy from a utility standpoint, whether it's water and electricity, those fundamental building blocks. And of course, and I've had discussions with certain senators lately about this, water as a very important aspect of a community's quality of life, which is increasingly important from the standpoint of workforce and the ability to track a high functional workforce to a particular area to support the needs of business. So water is foundational to that aspect in the business of water. And then second, and more specifically, and I think a growing area, is water itself as a business opportunity. Of course, agriculture and hydropower have always used water as an input to produce marketable products. But now we see more investment in water itself, either around new technologies to measure, treat, or distribute water, or sometimes, and I think there's different views on this, water is an asset in and of itself to be acquired and transferred in a market. And of course, there's ongoing and new recreational opportunities associated with the business of water itself. So ultimately, I think whatever the perspective, business interests want reliability with respect to the availability of water. That's kind of fundamental to everybody's interest, and that includes the federal government's policy goal with respect to water sustainability, reliability. Those are the things that we're trying to achieve in our various programs and in operating our federal projects and facilities. And so I think from that standpoint, the federal government and Protect the Flows as the business voice of the Colorado River are a natural alliance in trying to meet the challenges that we face today in providing clean, reliable water supplies while maintaining, or in some cases restoring, healthy ecosystems. So let me talk a little bit about the federal role in water and what we're trying to accomplish. I would start off by saying building resiliency and sustainability into water resources management is fundamental to President Obama's Climate Action Plan, which is a wonderful thing because we get support from the very top of the federal government. The President has been personally engaged in water issues. I was fortunate enough to be with the President when he visited the Central Valley of California in February 2014 to speak with the various constituencies deeply affected by the ongoing drought, which subsequently got much worse through 2015 and somewhat alleviated, but not fully alleviated, with the El Nino impact in California this year. After that visit from the President, he held at least 2 meetings that I was fortunate enough to participate in with Western governors on the issue specifically of drought and overall objectives and needs of Western states in trying to deal with the issue of drought. That focus on drought has continued to a larger, I think, set of policy initiatives with respect to water. The White House hosted a summit on water innovation in December 2015, and just recently on World Water Day on March 22nd hosted another symposium on water resources challenges, in which the President also issued a presidential memorandum on drought with a very aggressive action plan that will keep us busy through the very last day of the administration, I can assure you. And I would just also note, because I do think it's important to understand the high visibility that water issues are getting. The Secretary and I met for the second time in the last couple of years with the President on Monday afternoon. It's a series of cabinet engagement meetings that the White House is trying to put together to talk about basically our agenda through the remaining 9 months of his presidency. As I mentioned, it's the second one. So last year when we had this discussion, we talked a lot about water issues, and of course, as part of that was not just the drought, but wildland fire issues. So Sally and I decided, we would focus on other areas of our priorities going into the last 9 months. Of course, in the written presentation, we included a discussion on drought and water because he is very interested in these issues, but we talked about other things. And of course, at the end of the meeting, the President looked at us and said, well, we didn't have time to talk about water today, and so here's what I need as a follow-up information on water resource issues and things that you're doing to deal with them. So it's just indicative that you've got somebody very personally engaged, and from that standpoint, it's accrued to the benefit of, I think, all of us in support and resources to deal with water resource issues. Parochially at the Department of the Interior, we've been very encouraged by recent increases in funding to address drought and water resources as a whole in the West. The 2016 omnibus that got passed by Congress at the end of 2015 in December contained $13.3 billion for the Department of Interior, which was an 8% increase over 2015. But perhaps more importantly, it included $1.27 billion for reclamation, which was 12% higher than any other budget in the last 8 years. Now, as a former commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation, I say that with a lot of jealousy, and I've mentioned this to my successor, Esteban Lopez, and he reminds me that I, at least, when I came in 2009, had the benefit of the Recovery Act and an additional $950 million in addition to a year's appropriations to spend as we were all trying to do our best to revitalize the economy at that point in time. So he made his point. I won't be jealous anymore of his modest little increase. Part of that omnibus appropriations bill was included full funding for WaterSmart, the water efficiency and conservation program that's been mentioned several times here, $58 million. And in addition, Congress wrote in another $100 million for drought for actions with the most direct, immediate, and largest impact on extending limited water supplies. And of course, in allocating that additional $100 million, a lot of that is going to go to supplement the activities undertaken under the Water Smart program. I say it's significant because when Ann Castle and I worked on Water Smart and developed it and created a budget the first years of the administration, it was viewed as a source for Congress to shave off some of that Water Smart funding and put it into parochial programs in specific states. And I think, the tide has completely turned with respect to that as the Congress has added money to the Water Smart budget. And so from that standpoint, it's because I think we've made good use of those resources, but it's a lot of the advocacy that a lot of you all have done for that program because of the benefits that occur on the ground. So thank you very much for that. So I think we're in a good position with respect to the support we've gotten from the administration through the Interior Department, both secretaries that I've worked for, personally engaged in water resource issues, and we need every bit of that support because the challenges that we face exist on many levels. Population growth, new demands, aging infrastructure, and long-term drought and climate change are just a few of the challenges that come to mind. Population growth and shifting demands, the Colorado River Basin provides a perfect example. We used to talk about, and I looked at old talking points, 30 million people that this resource supports in the Seven Basin State area, and now we've adjusted the talking points to say 40 million people that this resource is supporting. And of course, in the basin study that Reclamation did with the Seven Basin States in 2012, the projections through 2060 are either, depending on the level of economic activity, 49.3 million to 76.5 million people. That's a significant shift that's going to put further stress, even as municipalities are doing a pretty good job, in fact, a great job, in increasing the efficiency on a gallon per capita per day level. But keeping up with that kind of level of population growth is going to add to the challenges that we face. With respect to unmet demands, there are still tribes in the Colorado River Basin who have unmet needs, notwithstanding the success that we've had with respect to Indian water rights settlements, and those rights need to be addressed, as well as the ongoing understanding and need, and quite frankly, public demand for environmental restoration and protection activities. You see it in polling, we see it in all across the advocacy that's done. I think there is certainly no right-left divide with respect to people's desire and their belief that we can have our cake and eat it too with respect to using water and still maintaining environmental sustainability from that standpoint. Aging infrastructures, as everybody knows, but we, particularly those of us who have been associated with reclamation, have to continually whine about, for a lack of a better word. We have very much aging infrastructure, facilities that are 50 to 100 years old. Reclamation and its partners who operate and maintain those facilities from a water standpoint, from a power generation standpoint, have done an excellent job of maintaining these works over the past 100 years. But quite frankly, there's limits to what you can do with baling wire. No, I'm just kidding. We don't do that with baling wire and duct tape. Maybe only on an as-needed basis for a few hours. But they need major reinvestment and rehabilitation in a lot of cases. And that Reclamation recently did an estimate that $3 billion was needed for major repair and rehabilitation over the next 5 years, with new needs coming online over time. So how we maintain that existing infrastructure and make the investments in new infrastructure to continue to try and stretch the limited water supplies that we have is yet another one of those significant challenges. And so from that standpoint, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we do that a little later. Drought and climate change, just over a year ago, I'd say at least half of the country, a lot of the Midwest, Southwest, even Pacific Northwest, was in serious drought conditions. A large part of those drought conditions have alleviated themselves, particularly in the Midwest area. and Pacific Northwest, but even California with the amount of precipitation that El Nino has yielded. I heard this morning on NPR that their latest snowpack survey was 95% of historical average. That's great, but that's not going to bounce back the reservoirs from the very, very depleted state that they went into this water year at, the lowest level ever for carryover water in the facilities, storage facilities that serve the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project. So 95% is good, and it's an improvement, and there will be a lot of water users who reap the benefits of that water supply and that snowpack, but there will be other water users in a priority system that don't get their water needs met. And even in the Colorado River Basin, at one point in time, we were very hopeful that El Nino would have a very positive impact here in this basin. I think we constantly have been talking about it, and now we're seeing it play out. The last 9 El Ninos in the Colorado River Basin, 3 were below average, 3 were average, and 3 were above average. So it's been a crapshoot, and looks like this year, at this point in time, last statistic I saw, which is about a week and a half old, was we were expecting 73% of average inflow into Lake Powell. So it looks like we're at a below average yield so far in this El Nino year. And then you add upon that, Reclamation just issued a report called the Secure Water Act report, basically reporting on the hydrology and the impacts of climate change on the major river basins in the West. What's I think most telling and most significant from my standpoint is it confirmed a statistic that had been developed over the last couple of years, that the projections are that by the end of this century, the West will increase 5 to 7 degrees Fahrenheit. Just to give you a little perspective, we've already seen the impacts of climate change in a lot of landscapes during the course of the 20th century, of which there was basically a 2-degree Fahrenheit rise that was documented in the 1900s. So now we can expect 5 to 7 more. And oh, by the way, on the Colorado River Basin, if you look at near Imperial Dam in the projections in the reclamation report, it is at the 7-degree Fahrenheit level. So it's on the high end of that projection. So that has all kinds of implications. Reclamation has a statistic that says, as a general metric, for every degree Fahrenheit increase that exists, you can expect a 3 to 4% reduction in runoff in the river systems. And then you add to that the other most telling statistic that we're basically losing a lot of the runoff in the April to July runoff season, and most of that will come off as winter runoff. We're going to have a different management regime that we have to deal with. I feel like I should wrap up the challenges at this point in time and move on to the happier part of the talk, but I've got one more. Even before we get to climate change and increasing populations through 2060, particularly in the Colorado River Basin, the immediate next couple years are very daunting in and of themselves. Lake Mead and Lake Powell are at 39% and 40% full respectively. The elevation of Lake Mead hit its lowest level below the magical 1075 elevation back in I think June of last year. And we've lost 100 feet of elevation in Lake Mead since 2000 when the reservoirs were last full, and we're looking at 20 to 35% chance of lower basin shortages as soon as next year, 2017. And all of these issues will affect water supply, food security, economy, jobs, ecosystems, but they also disrupt the stability that exists if we do have a shortage situation. So it is something that continually people are trying to address and not only brings stability in how we might allocate shortages, but continuing to talk about how we might avoid those shortages. So that gets to the what I think is really a hopeful story. Hopeful not because we're Pollyannish, but hopeful because we have good anecdotal evidence of very good partnerships, agreements, collaborations, and use of a broad set of tools now that we have to address these challenges. And I think that issue of partnership and collaborations, we talk a lot talk a lot about it amongst ourselves, but I think it really is an untold story on a broader level with people who like to continue to use that phrase. Whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting, a phrase that I despise, but now I've used twice in the last 2 water speeches I did. Both times I've noted that I despise the phrase. Effective collaborations and partnerships across the West are absolutely critical to address all those challenges that I just mentioned. And once again, I think you don't have to look any farther than the Colorado River Basin in particular, which has been marked by really 20 years of extraordinary collaborations and partnerships in the Colorado River Basin, led by a federal government that I think values and its partnership with the states, and terrific state water leaders who have decided that they're not going to live up to what Mark Reisner wrote about in Cadillac Desert, that the Colorado River is the most litigated, legislated, and debated watershed in the world. I think it's probably still the most negotiated, but that's what people are doing. They're sitting around a table and talking through a lot of strategies, not just amongst the feds and states, but bringing in different constituencies into that discussion, municipalities, obviously tribes who were left out for a long time, but then a lot of the individual constituency groups too. I'm going to just run through real quickly some of those partnerships because they're real. They've yielded high value. They all share a common thread that working alone, neither the federal government nor the local entities or the states could have created the tools or achieved the results that we have. Our goal is to provide certainty, predictability, and flexibility for Colorado River operations, and I think we've been somewhat successful in that. Real quick, interim surplus guidelines in 2001, which was built off the off-stream storage rule, which was negotiated in 1999. Those guidelines created the framework amongst the 7 states to ensure California was able to reduce its overuse of Colorado River water, and in a way that protected everybody else's rights to the water of this limited resource. That was followed up by 2003, the California 4.4 plan, which was actually the mechanism to ensure how California would get down to its 4.4 million acre-feet allocation under the Colorado River Compact. It also started us down the path to significant efficiency improvements within the Colorado River ag water user community. The 2007 record decision on coordinated operations, Lake Powell, Lake Mead, and the shortage sharing guidelines that were agreed to amongst the 7 states, probably one of the most far-reaching agreements in that it gave operational certainty to how shortages might be allocated that helps reduce the prospects for conflict, but it also by consensus created tools for those entities to conserve water that could be left in Lake Mead for use at a later date. And that process, known as the creating of intentionally created surplus, has been incredibly important during this drought period. We've got 7 Indian water rights settlements over the last 20 years in the Colorado River Basin, also adding to the certainty and the equity involved with getting tribes water who haven't had access before. New funding strategies, Brock Reservoir, a little 8,000 acre-foot regulating reservoir on the lower Colorado River that yields about, because it allows us to recapture some water that's released during the course of operation, yields about 70,000 acre-feet of water back into Lake Mead because of the operational flexibility it gives. Our cooperative agreements with Mexico, minutes 3, 16, 17, 18, and minute 319 in particular, providing operational certainty now, extending it to Mexico and the Colorado River, creating a framework for binational conservation investments, and of course, helping to look at the restoration of the environment in the Colorado River in a manner that was important to both countries. I would just note that minute 319, we've talked a lot about that in a lot of discussions I've had today, expires at the end of 2017. It's a very high priority for this administration. The states themselves, I believe, and certainly Mexico, to try and extend a new agreement, an extension of the current agreement, something that continues the benefits of that relationship with Mexico beyond that 2017 expiration date. Now we've also got, those agreements have yielded lots of benefits, but now we're recognize that we still have lots of challenges in front of us, and so the states in particular are not resting there. We've got a system conservation pilot that we've been implementing with the states, Reclamation putting in $3 million, the municipalities in the basin adding another 8, saving 62,000 acre-feet of water that will go to the system itself in Lake Mead, which is everybody collaborating for the benefit of everybody else, not one entity saying that's my water, which would be fine. That's good water management too, but it's really recognition of where the states are trying to build a process where the system as a whole benefits, and those benefits accrue from the lower basin all the way through the upper basin. That's been a successful partnership, and so much so I think it's going to be expanded on. And most importantly now, the states themselves, I think, are working on yet another very significant drought contingency plan. Recognizing that the 2007 record decision, those guidelines, provide certainty for a certain set of operational levels in Lake Mead, but there is uncertainty if we should start to fall through the elevation in Lake Mead fairly quickly, which could happen with extended drought. And so I think the states are looking at the prospects of not this year or next year, but sooner than expected there could be more of that uncertainty that water managers despise based on how quickly the system itself may be depleted. And so they are thinking very long and hard about a way to deal with this. The Secretary and I are very supportive of this effort, and so the federal government is a full partner in working with the states and other water users, other constituencies that I've talked about before, because it's going to be one of those situations where everybody's going to be involved if there's going to be a solution. And we feel like we've been, as an administration, fairly, when we came into office in 2009, on the heels of the 2007 agreement, there was stability on the system. We have added to that stability with a lot of the agreements, and particularly our agreements with Mexico and the work that we're doing on conservation in the basin. But we owe it to the next administration to try and create as much stability in the river as they come into office with new faces and having to understand these issues, work with the states, and decide how best they want to proceed. So we're very supportive of this effort. It's a high priority also if we can get a comprehensive drought contingency plan across the finish line. Finally, in the area of collaborations, we have on the very most local level, collaborations and partnerships that we create through our Water Smart program, as I mentioned, our drought planning programs at the Bureau of Reclamation. Since 2009, the federal government's invested about over $500 million through the Water Smart program, associated conservation efforts, and through this effort have created or facilitated the development of an additional 1 million acre-feet, mostly conservation, reuse, things that will add to those supplies through drought and times of plenty. It's been a terrific set of initiatives, projects that have been undertaken under the Water Smart program, married with the scientific work and the data planning efforts USGS is involved in. This has been an incredibly important program that we now look to combine with other conservation efforts, such as the ones I mentioned, the agreements in the Colorado River Basin, separately through some mix of Water Smart programs, but mostly those other agreements, such as the 2007 agreement, our agreement with Mexico, resulted in that 1 million acre-feet that we've put in Lake Mead over time. So we've got successes, and we're going to build on those successes. As I mentioned, the White House had a symposium on World Water Day just last week. The presidential memorandum has an action plan. One of those actions is for us to do more collaboration amongst ourselves, Bureau of Reclamation, Natural Resources Conservation Service at the Department of Ag. We have had in place for about 5 years now a coordinated program between Water Smart and EQIP in the Central Valley of California to try and combine reclamation's ability to help finance conservation projects on laterals, delivery systems with what NRCS does, which is finance on-farm conservation efforts. We've been very successful in combining those two programs in California. We're going to take that to the next step now. I know Chief Weller was here yesterday, and both of us are highly committed, particularly since it's in the President's Action Plan. But independent of that, we're highly committed to moving forward expeditiously and expanding our reclamation and USDA partnership to other river basins. So through the presidential memorandum, reclamation and NRCS will include the Colorado River Basin, a set of projects. I expect by this June we'll identify the several pilot locations and have a program in place for more water coordination activities between our two departments and our two agencies. And I think also, in addition to marrying up ourselves and our programs, there's going to be big opportunities to collaborate with the private sector as well in this process. So it's an exciting initiative to undertake in the last year, and I think it's one of those things that will, because it's just good water management, will extend well into the next administration, whoever is running the show at that point in time. So let me conclude by reiterating that the most important part, particularly since I took so long to talk about the challenges, we are making progress, very much so. With increased resources, support, and awareness, we're creating opportunities, we're facilitating partnerships, we're stimulating innovation, and we're having an effect in improving water resource management at the watershed level. But we're not resting on our laurels, and we continue to look at opportunities to develop new innovative approaches within the administration. And that brings me to reference that in December, at the White House Conference on Water Innovation that I mentioned, Secretary Jewell announced the Interior Department's creation of the Natural Resource Investment Center. As a former CEO of REI, Sally obviously understands the importance of partnering with the private sector, and the new center will use market-based tools and innovative public-private collaborations to conserve natural resources, enhance efficient water allocation, and promote increased investments in critical infrastructure. It's a huge agenda, and I'm proud to be here today to be joined by our new executive director, Jeff Klein, who has come on board about 1 month now in the position. We're very lucky to have Jeff. He brings a background in private equity and banking. He knows what makes capital flow, and he'll be a great partner in working with all of you here with Protect the Flows. Bottom line is we've talked about innovative financing and the need for it for quite some time now. Jeff is the guy who actually understands how we can get that done. He's also becoming very astute in the nuances of water law and the opportunities out there from talking to a lot of you. I'd say he may be the hardest working guy in the Department of the Interior, at least in the last month, and we're lucky to have his energy as well as his knowledge. And so I see many intersections for these programs and the Natural Resource Investment Center with the goals of Protect the Flows and its membership. Your white paper, which I got a chance to look at on the plane over here, your agenda just matches up well, whether it's recycling, reuse, conservation, the need to finance and fund infrastructure improvements, all of those things, the focus on the environment and the recreational opportunities and the business interest in that, it's all overlays very nicely with our agenda. Also, what makes all of this work is educating people on the challenges that we face, and Protect the Flows as part of the World Water Day Summit committed to engage and educate 500,000 Americans in water conservation practices over the next 18 months. I thought we had bitten off more than we could chew, but I'm sure you all will do a great job in that education process, and that's just an incredibly important part to build public support for all of the investments, time, effort, and money that we need to make. So your voice is unique at Protect the Flows. It's a great addition to the dialogue that we're having in this basin and across the West. I very much appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you today. And despite a very lengthy talk, I'm sensing that I've left enough time for questions. And so thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your remarks. I'm Marco Ugarte with Miller Coors. Yesterday we had an opportunity to visit with Chief Wheeler, and this is more a comment than a question. It's just a general remark around the public and private partnerships that are taking place. And in some aspects, the fact of having the voice of businesses, it's important, but as well it's very important to have other stakeholders in the table. So first of all, we are extremely pleased with the unveiling of the investment center, and we are also one of the first beneficiaries, if you will, of the partnerships and the willingness of the Department of Agriculture of NRCS to come and join us and understand our joint goals. We were, I think, at the beginning surprised that we share so many of our goals. We have so common interests that it makes the perfect sense and the perfect amalgamation of processes and then initiatives that can move forward. So we look forward to play an active role in that new phase and in this new center as well. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much. I just want to say I think there's opportunities out there because of the interest and the needs of the business community. There's just opportunities out there also through the dialogue and understanding that we have interests and programs that line up exactly with what the private sector would like to see. And I think we're seeing a lot of energy just on both aspects. Oh, you guys are trying to facilitate this type of activity, and that spurs a conversation, and it's something we should have done years ago, but I'm glad we're doing it now.
Yeah, I'm Tom Davis from Yuma. Mike, I appreciate your comments today. If you have time, I would like for you to just expound a little bit more on the Natural Resource Investment Center, where it's going to be housed, how we can have access to it, that sort of thing. Just a little more detail, please. Thank you.
It's housed in the mind of Jeff Klein, right here, our new executive director. We do have some very talented help for Jeff. We've got some fellows working with him, and so we are really trying to and we're going to continue to increase the staff. It'll be a small staff. Hopefully, at the end of the day, we'll have 3 or 4 plus some support for that effort. So it's that main interior. Jeff, I'm lucky enough to be, he's working for me, although he's educating me as much as anything else in this process. But we want to give it high visibility. We want to give the opportunity for Jeff to interact with a lot of the different areas of interior. In addition to the water aspect, there's very much, we're looking at also in land management, the opportunity to incentivize, create mitigation banks that has a value from a permitting perspective, but it also has a value in us incentivizing folks to contribute to the conservation goals that we have in our land management practices. So Jeff, we're lucky to bring him on for a couple of years. We do not view this as something that's part of this administration or standing it up, but this agenda and those partnerships transcend, politics. They're non-political. They're just a good manner of practice. So that's why we consciously made the decision. We're standing this up with support and resources from the department standpoint, and I think the value of the policy initiatives that Jeff thinks we need to institute to facilitate some of this activity, as well as just the projects that we'll do and the ability to get agreements and financing in place to do those projects will demonstrate the success of the overall effort. And so Jeff is your primary contact, the most sought after guy in the Department of the Interior these days, and there'll be a team of folks to be able to support continued discussions.
And I just met Jeff this morning, so we can't commit him to this yet, but certainly one of the steps out of this event would be to think about, at a minimum, doing a webinar and possibly an on-the-ground seminar out here in the basin and get him back out here into the Southwest and out into the basin, God's country, and hold a session on the center.
He hasn't, I think you made a comment this morning about how much I travel. I don't think I've seen you much in Washington, D.C. either. He's in high demand right now.
One more question?
Eric Kuhn, Colorado. Since communications is key, really, and how we deal with this, when are we going to be, and also I want to mention, since the administration's really committed to climate change issues, when are we going to be brave enough to quit calling what's happening in the Colorado and out west an extended drought or a drought, which tells people that it'll just wait and it'll get better, and call us managing under a new normal?
As I expected from Eric, a great question. I will make that transition when the scientists tell me I can make that transition. And I see, there is a lot of discussion. I think there is a new normal already, just in that 2-degree Fahrenheit increase during the 20th century. That has created a shift in timing of flows. It has created less snowpack already. The question, what I really don't know is, and I hope that this is just a drought cycle of which we will have, a couple of years like 2011 that follow, and we're out of a drought cycle even if the overall adjustment is new. And I don't know that that's the case right now, but I do constantly review all the new studies and try and understand what folks are really projecting. I think more and more we know we've had some level of adjustment. Whether that adjustment is as bad as this 16-year drought, that's the part I don't know. But I think at the end of the day, I completely understand your point. We have to reorient people fundamentally, and I hope in talking about this, even talking about it as drought, we are doing that, because it is those temperature increases, it is those other projections, but it's those other challenges too, particularly in the West, that exist that are going to continually stress this resource. I didn't even talk about aquifer depletion, which is just forcing people to look at other alternatives and increasing the competition for a scarce surface resource.
A great set of remarks, and thank you for taking the time to come out here and spend some time with us today. The last step in the process before we do let Mike go is to present him with the 2016 Corporate Water Innovation Award from Protect the Flows. I think the award speaks for itself. The name innovation is in there, the name corporate is in there, and I think from what we've just heard in the presentation today that Mike's record on water and where the department's going, where they're going with the center, where they're moving on innovation and new practices here in the basin, new ways of doing business here in the basin. Maybe next year we'll add collaboration to the name of the award just to make sure we touch on all those key buttons. But we're very proud to present Deputy Secretary Mike Connor with this award, and here to present it is John Friedman from GE Water.
Thanks very much, Craig. It's really an honor to be able to present this award on behalf of Protect the Flows to Deputy Secretary Connor, Mike. Dave, you mentioned that you first met Mike about 20 years ago. I met him about 10 years ago, but I had heard of him even before I met him. Mike, I think you'll recall that GE, your first employer, was forming a research collaborative focused on water with New Mexico State University, Mike's alma mater. And we had secured the support of Senator Pete Domenici, an incredibly powerful Republican senator from New Mexico, but New Mexico had two incredibly powerful senators. The other one was Senator Jeff Bingaman, for whom Mike was counsel at the time, I believe, for the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. And I said to the president of New Mexico State University, Mike Martin, I said, Mike, I think we also need to get the support of Senator Bingaman. And he said, don't worry about Senator Bingaman. I'll take care of that. And I said, well, I'm in Washington, let me do it. He said, no. I'm going to talk to his top advisor, Mike Connor. And I said, yeah, you know Mike? And he said, yes, I do. And if Mike doesn't listen to me, I'm going to go over his head. I said, wow, right to Senator Bingaman. He said, oh, no, I'm going to talk to his mother. She sits behind me at the home football games. Is that a true story, Mike? It is. And, I think Mike has carried that sense that reputation is everything, which I think people in New Mexico, first of all, they all know each other. They're all related or they know each other. But I think that sense that reputation precedes you and it's everything, he carried that with him to Washington. And I'll say that, Mike, you mentioned in your remarks that, you know, Washington can be somewhat partisan at times. And that can result in gridlock. But here's a guy who has always risen above the fray. He's a guy who's gotten things done. He is respected and liked by everyone. And he's been incredibly effective. And so, Mike, I think when we look at just listening to your talk and all of the accomplishments from Department of Interior, but when we listen to all of that incredible track record, congratulations. Today, the award is really for your efforts to secure sustainable water in the Colorado River Basin. And also, I just want to note the most recent accomplishment, starting this natural resource investment center, which I think holds great promise for our nation. And so, congratulations, thank you very much. And with that, I will hand you this award with your picture.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Usually you take the award and you show everybody, except it's my picture, so I feel really weird if I do that. Let me just quickly say, I would probably be the first to say that when you're in a position like mine, sometimes you get too much blame for what goes on. This is a situation where you get too much credit for some of the innovations. I very much appreciate the recognition, but I've had the ability to work for a great senator, great secretaries, a president who care about water resource issues, who always create the space and the opportunity and tell staff or other senior officials to go out and do great things. I've had the advantage of great partners. I still remember when Ann and I walked in 2009, really with Ken Salazar's blessing to do whatever we needed to do. And it was very exciting. And now I've got, so from colleagues to bosses to new colleagues from outside the traditional water user arena. It's just been the right place and the right time, and I very much appreciate the recognition, and I very much look forward to continuing our work together and building on these efforts. Thank you.